The NBA world did not have a chance to witness the prime Arvydas Sabonis, and yet his peers considered him to be one of the best big men in basketball history.
What a pass by Sabonis! Wrap around to Harvey.
Imagine a 7'3" center with unique court vision, deep shooting range, unguardable post game, and elite athleticism. Bill Walton once described Sabonis as a 7'3" Larry Bird, while Kevin Garnett recently recalled him as his favorite European player ever, who let Americans know they weren't the only ones who could hoop. Naturally, the question arises, why didn't Arvydas Sabonis come to the NBA earlier? The Western world got its first glimpse of Arvydas Sabonis' greatness back in 1982, when the 17-year-old Lithuanian faced the future #1 NBA draft pick Ralph Sampson in a friendly match between the Soviet Union and the University of Virginia. Just look how incredibly athletic young Sabonis was. Even though Sabonis traveled to the US to showcase his talents from time to time, most NBA teams didn't have scouts overseas and were lacking information on European talents. That's why the Atlanta Hawks, who were one of the few teams that had scouting in Europe, drafted him only with the 77th overall pick in 1985. As the Hawks head coach Mike Fratello recalled saying,
"So when it got to 4th round, 5th round, whatever it was, that we said, let's take Arvydas Sabonis and see what happens."
However, the selection was voided because at the time the NBA had a rule that stated if the club drafts a player and he does not join the team for the upcoming season, he will be put back in the draft pool for next year. To understand why Sabonis couldn't join the Hawks, we need to briefly remind ourselves of the history of the Cold War. At that time, the Soviet Union had blocked itself and its satellite states from any contact with the West and its allied countries, giving birth to the Iron Curtain. It was inconceivable that someone would leave the USSR and move to a Western country to live and work there. The Soviet government applied their restrictions not only to the general public, but to the top athletes, scientists, or artists of the country as well. For example, the best basketball players in the USSR actually did not have contracts with the teams, and their official employment documents listed them as mechanics, locksmiths, or other more traditional professions. Not only was Sabonis unable to join the NBA at the time, he didn't even know that the Hawks had drafted him. He only found out about it after the Blazers selected him, as he recalled later. "After Portland picked me, someone told me that I was drafted before as well. We didn't have much information back then." The Hawks' pick of Sabonis being voided stirred up the NBA. Firstly, Atlanta's front office made a lot of noise about the situation and arguably made the NBA change their rules. The teams were now able to keep players' rights for an unlimited amount of time. Secondly, it shined a light on the Lithuanian gem, and other NBA clubs caught up on Sabonis' potential. Hence, he got drafted in the first round next year by the Portland Trail Blazers.
Arvydas Sabonis of the Soviet Union.
Oh, well, now that's going to be an interesting selection.
Good night, nurse. Ridiculous. Just ridiculous.
The Blazers noticed the changing situation in the USSR and were hoping to bring Sabonis to their team in the next few years. The Iron Curtain was lifted in 1989, giving opportunities for the USSR players to finally join the Western teams. Perhaps the greatest example of using this opportunity was Sabonis' countryman Šarūnas Marčiulionis, who was the first European to truly blossom in the NBA. Not only did he pave the way for European players, but also introduced the Euro step move, which was later popularized by Manu Ginobili. The question still remains, why, even after the collapse of the Iron Curtain, Sabonis did not follow Marčiulionis' footsteps and join the NBA? As you've seen earlier, peak Arvydas Sabonis was something else. Although he was exceptionally tall, Sabonis had the agility of a forward. A quicker Bill Walton, as former Mavericks GM Donnie Nelson once said. Unfortunately, his prime didn't last long, as Sabonis suffered very serious injuries early in his career. You could say Sabonis was really unlucky. Or perhaps it was the regime of the USSR, or maybe it was his size, or his all-or-nothing mentality that led to all these injuries. We can't tell for sure, but it is clear that the Lithuanian wasn't the same after tearing his Achilles tendon twice. The period from 1986 to 1987 was without a doubt the most devastating in his career. First, the 21-year-old Arvydas Sabonis had an ankle injury in preparation for the 1986 World Cup in Spain. A few months later, he returned to play for his hometown team Žalgiris, where, against Cibona Zagreb, he pulled his right Achilles tendon. Again, not fully recovered, he came back in the 1987 USSR League final in March to help Žalgiris beat CSKA. 2 months later, in preparation for the European Championship, Sabonis tore his Achilles completely, in theory causing him to miss at least the first half of next season. And to make things go from horrible to disastrous, during the off-season, a recovering Sabonis accidentally fell off the stairs at a hotel and tore the same Achilles tendon again. The USSR had a lot of pride in their athletic achievements, and you could say Sabonis was a victim of it. Up until his Achilles tear, he was playing for the Soviet national team every summer and every championship. No was not an answer at the time for the Soviets. His love for his hometown team Žalgiris Kaunas did not help either, as after very busy summers spent playing for the USSR, he didn't take any time off with Žalgiris, as the club meant everything to him. The rehab from his Achilles tear was going slowly. Over a year later, Sabonis was still not fully recovered. Yet, the USSR surprised everyone by announcing that the Lithuanian will be playing in the 1988 Seoul Olympics, even though the player was telling the public that there is no way he will be able to play in the tournament. Still, Sabonis was invited to watch the team's practices, and his former teammates recall how the passive spectator became the starting center for the USSR at the Olympics. At first, national team's head coach Alexander Gomelsky would ask Sabonis to help out in practices, so he did whilst wearing his beloved sandals. Gomelsky knew how competitive Sabonis was, as his requests grew into asking Sabonis to shoot a few shots, then defend a few possessions, and before you knew it, he was dunking the ball. It took one dunk from Sabonis, who was in his sandals, for the team management to start demanding the Lithuanian to play. USSR rushed Sabonis to make his debut in the Olympics, which resulted in beating Team USA with David Robinson in the semis and winning his first and only Olympic gold medal against Yugoslavia. Is it possible that not taking that summer off sped up his decline even more? No one can tell, though he got injured again the following season playing for Žalgiris Kaunas. Eventually, he developed chronic knee pain, ankle and groin issues that significantly limited his mobility and explosiveness. Yet even after all these injuries, he remained one of the best players in Europe and perhaps the whole world. Now, the only thing stopping Sabonis from joining the NBA was Sabonis himself. After the fall of the Iron Curtain and having recovered from Achilles injuries, Arvydas Sabonis finally had the chance to start a new chapter in the United States of America. At the end of the 1989 season, the Portland Trail Blazers front office started pursuing Sabonis. They offered the big man a potential 2-year deal, paying him $1 million per season. Portland's way of presenting the offer was quite original. They asked the Lithuanian-American Valdas Adamkus, who later became the president of Lithuania, to personally hand Sabonis the contract in his homeland. During his special task, Adamkus was waiting in Moscow for his transfer flight to Lithuania when he heard the news of Sabonis already signing with a Spanish team, Forum Valladolid. The hope that he could convince Sabonis to change his mind was still alive, but unfortunately, it was too late. While the Blazers' contract offer was traveling across the Atlantic, the Valladolid president Gonzalo won the race and was already in Sabonis' homeland. He straight up told me, "Here is the contract, go ahead," Sabonis remembered. Of course, Lithuania was still part of the USSR, and one of the conditions for signing with a Western team was that the player had to give up a reasonable amount of the money to the Soviet Sport Department. The USSR coach Gomelsky, who was present at the negotiations, looked at the contract first and said that 70% of the money should go to the sports department, leaving only 30% to the player. Sabonis did not find that sensible and managed to convince the coach to flip those numbers around, finalizing the deal at $1 million per season, of which he would get $700,000. Financially, the Blazers' offer was quite similar to the one of Valladolid. So why did Sabonis sign with the Spaniards anyways? Was it just a matter of being first to make the offer? Well, not really. Many years later, Sabonis himself revealed that after all his injuries, he didn't feel physically ready for the NBA, where the level of athleticism was much higher. In addition, there were still doubts in Sabonis' head concerning his departure from the USSR if he waited too long for another offer. In a bit of a rush, he took the safer route, choosing similar money, a country that's not too far away from his homeland, and basketball culture that he was already familiar with. By the summer of 1992, his contract with Valladolid was up, and surely it was finally the time to make the leap to the NBA, right? Not just yet. Sabonis had established his dominance in Spain and became the most wanted name in the European market.
Sabonis ha ganado la posición y machaca. Perfecto el trabajo.
The Spanish giants Real Madrid offered him $1.5 million per year, while the Blazers did not present Sabonis with any concrete offers. Having spent 3 years there, Sabonis also fell in love with Spain and decided to stay there for 3 more years, signing with Real Madrid. His tenure at Real Madrid showed that even after all these injuries, Sabonis was still the best player in Europe. The best proof of that was the 1995 EuroLeague Championship, with Final Four MVP to top it off.
Le deja la pelota a Sabonis de 3, canasta de 3 puntos de Sabonis.
Sabonis' eventual arrival to Portland had a lot to do with changes in the Trail Blazers front office. In 1995, the Blazers had hired a new executive, Bob Whitsitt, who was going through the list of players drafted prior and asked his colleagues why Sabonis isn't in Portland yet. Whitsitt did not hesitate and traveled to Madrid to see the Lithuanian play. What he saw when spectating Sabonis' game only proved what he knew already. Sabonis was still an NBA caliber player. After meeting with Sabonis at one of his favorite restaurants in Madrid, the big man asked,
"You know, people from Portland have been coming over here every year, and they've never tried to get me to come back over. Now I'm older. Now you're a new guy. Why is this going to be different?" And I explained to him, no, this is different because I want to do it right now.
Sabonis had conquered European basketball, winning all major trophies, while being the best player on the best team in Europe. The only challenge he could find now was in the NBA. So he finally decided it was time to join the strongest league in the world. Knowing his injury history, the Blazers wanted to make sure Sabonis was healthy enough to play in the NBA. The medical checkup results shocked them. Arvydas could qualify for a handicapped parking spot based on the X-rays alone, the Blazers team physician jokingly concluded. It was surprising how successful Sabonis was despite his awfully worn-out body. Later, in the Book of Basketball, Bill Simmons described Sabonis as lumbering up and down the court in what looked to be concrete Nikes. Nevertheless, the Blazers signed Sabonis to a 3-year, $8 million deal. The oldest rookie that season debuted with 14.5 points and 8.1 rebounds in only 24 minutes per game. In the playoffs, his averages ramped up to 23.6 points and 10.2 rebounds. Not bad for a guy who could legally be considered handicapped.
Rod on the drive. Rod on the pull-up. Sabonis with a drive.
If a 31-year-old limping Sabonis was able to put up such numbers, we can only imagine what could have been if he had come to the NBA much earlier. Despite not winning the NBA championship, Sabonis had a successful 7-year stint with the Blazers, making deep playoff runs and being one of the most important pieces of the team.
Sabonis with 2.7 seconds ties the game.
Even though his NBA peers did not have a chance to face up against his prime version, they were still in awe of his skill set. Arvydas Sabonis is perhaps the biggest what if in the history of basketball.